Beautiful people, welcome to Remy's Fashion. My name is Remy. In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to draft an overbust corset pattern with an hourglass shape. If this is something you would like to learn to draft, then keep watching. The measurements you will need are on the screen. So the first thing I'm going to do now is to draw out a starting point. I always like to have a starting point. This is my starting point, and I will label this starting point my shoulder line. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to measure out my vertical measurements. That is from my shoulder to my bust. The measurement from my shoulder to my bust is 12 inches. I'll measure and I will mark. Then I will measure from my shoulder to my under bust. For me, that is 16 inches. I'll measure 16 inches from my shoulder, that's my starting point, to my under bust. I will mark. And then from my shoulder to my waist, the measurement from my shoulder to my waist is 19 inches. I'll measure 19 inches down and I will mark. And then I will draw a horizontal line to connect my points. And then I'm going to label. This is my bust line, under bust line, and my waistline. So the next thing I'm going to do for this corset pattern, I'm going to be using the bust dart technique. The front and the back, they're not going to be equal. So the front pattern is usually longer than the back, and we'll use the bust dart technique to cover up that length, and then we'll make them the same by closing up the bust dart. So that means for me now, my shoulder to waist is 19 inches. For my back, my shoulder to waist is 17.5 inches. The difference between my front and my back is 1.5 inch. I'm going to take that into consideration when drafting this pattern. So now I'm going to add the hip measurements to my measurements right now, okay? And then once we do the shaping, then we'll get the right length that we need. So this length I'm going to be adding, we're not going to be using everything, but I'm going to put it to help us to draft out our pattern. So from my waist, I'm going to measure 8 inches down and I'll mark. This depends on how you want your corset pattern to be. So I measured 8 inches down from my waist, and that's going to be my hip line. And then I'm going to label hip line. So after doing this, the next thing I'm going to do is to plot in my shoulder measurement. So whatever your shoulder is, divide it into 2. Mine is 18. Divided by 2 is going to give me 9 inches. So I'm going to measure 9 inches on my shoulder line. And that puts me here. I'm just going to mark. Once I mark that, the next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to draw out my neck width and neck depth. I'm not going to be using the neck depth, but I'm going to draw it anyway so that you can follow along with what I am doing. So I'm going to be using the standard measurement of 3 inches by 3 inches. And then I'm going to connect. So after doing this, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drop my shoulder by 1 inch because our shoulders are not straight. So I'm just going to measure from my shoulder measurement. I'll drop it down by 1 inch, and then I'll connect from this 1 inch to the neck width. After doing this, the next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to draw out my armhole line. And then to get the measurement for your armhole line, you divide your bust circumference by 6 and add 1.5 inch. So if I do that, mine is 9 inches. So I'm just going to measure 9 inches down here. And for this to know where to draw your horizontal line, you take your half shoulder measurement, you bring it down here. Mine is 9 inches. So I'll bring it down here. This is where it is. And then I'm going to draw out my chest line. So after drawing my chest line, I will now draw my armhole line, which is straight down to the chest line. Okay, and I'm going to label this chest line. So that's my chest line. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to create my curve, my armhole curve. To do that, I'm going to take the midpoint of my armhole line. My armhole line is 9 inches. So the midpoint of mine is 4.5. So whatever yours is, you measure and mark. And then I'm going to go in by 1/2 an inch. And that puts me there. And then for me to be able to draw out this curve, I need my bust circumference measurement, which I'm going to be plotting on my chest line. So whatever your bust circumference measurement is, divided by 4. Mine is 44. Divided by 4 is going to give me 11 inches. And I'm going to measure and mark 11 inches down here. And then I'm going to connect from this point to this point to this point. That is going to give me my armhole curve. So this is my armhole curve. So after doing this, the next thing I'm going to do now is to draft out my darts. I'm going to be plotting my darts on my bust line, under bust line, waistline, and my hip line. So whatever your nipple to nipple measurement is, divided by 2 and then plot it in. So mine is 4.5 inches. So I'll measure 4.5 inches. I'll mark on my bust line, on my under bust line, waistline, and then the hip line. And then I'm going to draw a vertical line to connect all my points. From my hip line, I'm just going to go up by 2 inches. I'm going to go up by 2 inches and I'll mark. And then on the waistline, I'm going to open up the waist by 1.5 inch. That's a total of 1.5 inch. That's 0.75 on each side. And then I'm going to connect upwards to the bust line and downwards to this point where I came up by 2 inches. So this is me drawing out my dart legs. So the next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to measure and mark the midpoint of the shoulder. So whatever your shoulder is, take your measurement and get the midpoint. So I'm just going to take my measurement like this. It's easier to do like this to get your midpoint. So just fold your tape rule like this and then get your midpoint. So this is my midpoint. From this midpoint now, I'm going to connect it to my bust point. Like this. So after doing this, the next thing I'm going to do now is to plot in my body measurements. So my bust circumference measurement divided by 4. 44 divided by 4 is 11 inches. I've already plotted it on my chest line. I'll do the same thing on my bust line. So that's it there. My waist circumference measurement is 38 inches. Divided by 4 is going to give me 9.5 inches. So on the waistline, I'm going to measure 9.5 inches and I'll plot. And then you take the measurement of what your dart is. Mine is 1.5. I'll put it back. This is you replacing the dart you took. And then my hip circumference measurement is 47 divided by 4. It's going to give me 11.75. So I'm just going to measure 11.75 inches and I'll mark. And then I'm going to connect all my points. I'll now connect from my bust point to my waist. And then from my waist, I'll connect to the hip line. Like this. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to create my bust darts. Remember I said the difference between my front and my back is 1.5 inch. So my front shoulder to waist is 19 inches and my back shoulder to waist is 17.5 inches. By the time I subtract 17.5 from 19, I'm going to be left with 1.5 inch. So now I'm going to use that amount to create my bust dart. On the bust line, so you go down by 1.5. So this is my 1.5 here. And from here, I'm going to connect to the bust point. And then here on this waistline, I'm just going to draw this down to the end. This is 1.5 as well. So I'm just going to draw it down to the end. The next thing I'm going to do is to tighten the under bust. So after drawing this line all the way down to the hip line, I'm going to extend it all the way to the under bust as well. So I'm going to extend it to the under bust. Like this, you see? So I've extended it to the under bust all the way down to the hip line. And the next thing I'm going to do now is to draw out my under bust curves. So I will draw out the curves from the under bust line to my bust point. I'll do the same thing on the other side. So the next thing we're going to do now is to draft out our neckline. So from the chest line, you decide how far upwards you want to go. From the chest line, you measure upwards. So you decide how much you want to go up by. I'm going to go up by 3.5 inches, I'll mark. And then I'll draw a straight line across. So this is a personal preference. You can decide to go up further or you go lower. It all depends on you. So I'll now draw a line across. Like this. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create my over bust tightening. So I'm going to be measuring 1/4 of an inch on both sides of this line. 1/4 of an inch. And then I'm going to connect each side to the bust point. I'm going to extend it all the way to the shoulder line, and I want the top as well to be 1/4 of an inch on each side. So that's a total of 1/2 an inch. And then I'll connect upwards. Okay, so that's a total of 1/2 an inch. That's 1/4 on each side. So that's 1/2 an inch. That's 1/2 an inch. So this dart intake, I'm going to replace what I took on this side so that I can draw another armhole. So this dart intake, I'm going to replace it because we're cutting off this dart. Once we cut off this dart, our shoulder is going to be short. You don't want that. So I'm going to replace it. That's a total of 1/2 an inch. So I'm going to measure 1/2 an inch. Okay, and then you extend that line. I'll extend this line. Like this. And then on here as well, I'm going to extend because I need to draw another armhole curve. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to connect. So I'm just going to connect and create a new armhole so that we do not have shortage, you know. You want your bust to be covered. So we need to recreate a new armhole. So now this is me creating a new armhole. So the next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut open my bust line. To be able to create the neckline, I'll cut open this. So this is my bust line. So I'm just going to cut it open to the bust point. Once I get there, I'll stop. So after doing that, I'm going to close this dart because now I want to draw out my neckline. So I will close up the dart to draw out my neckline. I'll fold in my darts. You want to fold in your dart so that when you draw out your neckline, the neckline on both sides will be the same so that one part is not longer than the other part. See, like this. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to draw out my neckline while your dart is folded. Okay, so make sure you cover up your darts. After covering up my darts, I'm going to connect because we want that pointed edge. I'm going to connect from my chest line to that point. Okay, from this point to my chest line. Like this. And then we're going to do the same thing for the other side. So I'll now connect the other side. You know, remember we want a pointed edge on this side. On here, so I'll connect into the second armhole like this. So you just go blend. I want to blend this into this armhole like that. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and close up my dart because this is going to go, and this part as well. I'm going to be cutting it out. So the next thing I'm going to do is to cut open my shoulder dart so that I can close up my bust dart. I'll close up the bust dart. So So after doing that, the next thing is the body measurements. We've already taken that off. Nothing has changed on the waistline. It's still the same thing. Okay, so we'll just connect from here to the waist. And then for the hip line, we have to replace this dart and measure whatever yours is and replace it. Okay, mine is 1.5. I'll replace it down here. And then from this armhole now, connect to the waistline because my waistline is still the same. So I'll just connect from here to the waistline like this. And then from the waistline to the hip, taking into account our new hip measurements. That's we adding back the dart on there. So this one is going to be cut off. This is not the line we're using. This is the line we're going to be using. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to be creating another dart. So this line, I'm going to divide it into two and then create a dart. So the next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a side dart. Okay. So I'm just going to measure what this is. Okay. And then I'm going to divide it into two. And then I have my point there. And then from this point, you don't have to divide. Well, you can divide if you want to, but I want mine into two. So from this point, I'm going to draw a vertical line all the way up and all the way down. I use a longer ruler so that it can get from one point to the next point, okay? You can decide to do whatever design you want. You can slant the line. You can make it straight. So I'm doing this all the way to the top of my neckline. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this dart. I'm going to be creating a dart of half an inch. That's 0.25 inch on each side. That's a total of half an inch. This is a quarter. And then I'll connect upwards. So this is me snatching my waist. So by the time I do this for the front, I'll do it for the back as well. And then you would have succeeded in snatching your waist by almost 2 inches. Because this is half an inch here, half an inch on the other side of the front. That's 1 inch in front, 1 inch at the back. So that's a total of 2 inches, okay? I'll do the same thing downwards. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be creating the curve for this pattern. You know, you don't want your corset to be very long so that when you wear it, you can be very comfortable in your corset. So on the side, I'm going to go down by 4 inches. I'm going to mark 4 inches. Then the center front, I'm going to go down by 6.5 inches. That's 6.5. I'm going to measure from the waist down to 6.5. And that puts me here. So I use my curve to connect to give me that nice shape. Okay. This is my curve. So this is my corset pattern all done. So the next thing I need to do is to label. So this is my center front. So I'll say center front. And then this is my side front. So this is my side front. Okay. So this is my pattern. This is 1, 2, and 3. And this goes towards this one. So once you label like this, you will not forget. You know, you can decide 1, 2, 3. Center front, side front. Okay. So this is my front corset pattern with an hourglass shape. So this dart is going to be cut off. This dart is going to be cut off as well. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to cut out this pattern. So these are my front corset patterns. So the next thing we need to do now is to draft out our back patterns. So go ahead and write the title of your corset. There's so many different types of corsets. So write the title of yours so that you don't get them mixed up. So we'll now draft the back pattern. So to draft the back pattern, I'm going to be drawing out my basic lines. Like I'll start with the starting point, just like I did for the front. So this is my starting point, and this starting point, I'm going to label it shoulder line. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw out my vertical measurements. So for the back, I'm going to draw out from my shoulder to my bust. So mine is 12 inches. So for my back, my shoulder to my waist is 17.5 inches. So it's 1.5 inch shorter than my front pattern. And then I'll draw horizontal lines to connect. So I'm just repeating exactly what I did for the front in drawing out my basic bodies. So this is my bust line. And this is my waist line. So the next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to measure out 8 inches from my waistline. This is to draw out my hip line. We're not going to be using the whole length, but I'm going to draw it out anyway, just like I did for my front. And this is my hip line. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to plot my shoulder measurement on my shoulder line. So mine is 9 inches. So whatever your shoulder measurement is, divide it by 2 and get your shoulder measurement. So mine is 9 inches. I'll plot. And then I'm going to draw out my neck width and neck depth. I'm going to be using 3 inches and I'm going to come down by 1 inch. We're not going to be using this, but I'm just drawing it out anyway so that you can follow along with what I'm doing. We're going to be using the width, but we're not going to be using the depth because we're going to have a yoke. So after doing this, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to slope my shoulder by 1 inch, just like I did for the front. So 1 inch. And then I'll connect to the width of my neckline. So after doing this, the next thing is to draw out the armhole line. So divide whatever your bust circumference is by 6 and add 1.5 inch. So mine is 9 inches. And then I'll take my shoulder measurement and put it here just to have the right measurements here. And then I'll draw a horizontal line to connect the points. This is me creating my chest line. So after doing that, I'm going to drop this to the chest line. So this is my armhole line. I'm going to label this. This is my chest line. So the next thing I need to do now is to create my armhole curve. So I'm going to take the midpoint of my armhole line. So mine is 4.5 inches. I'll mark. And then I'm going to plot in my bust circumference measurement on my chest line. And mine is 11 inches. So divide your bust circumference measurement by 4. So whatever you get, you plot in here. So mine is 11. So the next thing I need to do now is to connect. I'm going to draw out a curve from here to here. And that is my armhole curve for the back. After doing this, the next thing I'm going to do now is to draft out my darts. So I'm going to be measuring my nipple to nipple measurement. So that's your bust span measurement. I'm going to measure it on the chest line, bust line, waistline, and the hip line. So mine is 4.5 inches. I'll mark. After measuring out my bust span measurement on my chest line, bust line, waistline, and the length line, I will now draw a vertical line to connect all the points. And then I'll go up by 2 inches, just like I did for the front. And then I will open up my dart on the waistline. I'm opening it up by 0.75 on each side. That's a total of 1.5 inch. And then I'm going to connect upwards to the chest line. So from the waist to the chest on both sides. And then I'm going to connect downwards. So the next thing I will do is I'm going to plot in my body measurements. So on my bust line is 11 inches. So I measure 11 inches on my bust line and I'll mark. On my waistline, when you divide your circumference measurement divided by 4, whatever you have, you plot it in there. Mine is 9.5 inches and I will mark. And then I'm going to take this dart. So whatever your dart is, you add it back. So mine is 1.5 inch. I'm going to add it back here. And then for my hip circumference measurement, mine is 11.75 inches. I'm going to measure and I will plot it in here. The next thing I need to do now is to draw out my lines. I'm going to connect this to this. And then I'm going to connect from here to here. And then for the waist, before I cover up this one, I'm going to bring in my front pattern to align it so that I can have the right measurement. This is my side for my front. So I'm just going to align it. See, I'll just align it to the waistline, you see, and then just mark so that they will be the same. Okay, so I'll just mark here. So this is the right length and the width as well. Okay, so that's where I'm going to be connecting from. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to measure 6.5 inches down from the center back because that's what I did for the front. Okay, here. So I'm just going to connect from here to here. And then here I'll just do dotted lines, because I will not need that part. And then I'll take my curve ruler. This is where I marked. And then just confirm that it's 4 inches, because for the front, I did 4 inches. See? So that's 4 inches. That works. So from there, I'm going to connect down to this 6.5 inches all the way down here. So this will give me the same shape with the front, okay? So after doing this, the next thing I need to do is, I'm now going to work on the yoke. I will draw out my yoke for the back. So using a curve ruler like this, I'm going to start from this, my armhole, and then I'm just going to connect from here towards the center back like this. So this is my yoke. Then on the top and at the bottom, on here and on here, I'm going to be creating a dart. So on this line, top and bottom, I'm going to open it up by 1/4 of an inch on each side. So I'll measure 1/4 of an inch. At the top, that's a total of 1/2 inch. And I'll do the same thing at the bottom as well. So after measuring this 1/4 of an inch on each side, I'm going to connect from here to the waistline, from this 1/4 of an inch to the waistline, and then from the waistline down to the hip line, like this. I'll do the same thing for this other side as well. And then from the waist to the hip line. Okay, so that is that. And then on this side, this is my center back. Okay, so I'll put CB here, CB. And then this is my side back. So this is my SB. So this is my side back now. I'm going to divide it into 2 equal halves. So I'll just divide it into 2. And then I'll just draw a straight line all the way down. So I'm going to use this to snatch my waist. So this is my waist snatching for the back. So I'm going to open it up by 1/4 of an inch on each side, just like we did for the front. That's a total of 1/2 inch. I'm going to go up and then I will go down. I'm going to connect upwards on both sides and then downwards on both sides. So this is my waist snatching. And then when you check that, you see it's a total of 1/2 inch for me. So I will want to have eyelets for this corset. So from the center back, this is my center back. I'm going to go in by 1.25 inches inwards. So I'm just going to measure 1.25 inches. You can do more, you can do less. This is a personal preference. And then at the top and at the bottom, you can decide to do like a V-shape effect and then do less here. You can do more here and less here. And then you connect it like a V-shape effect. But if you want it straight, you use the same 1.25, that's 1/4. The same thing, you plot it in there, and then I will draw a straight line to connect these points. So this is, like I said, this is a personal preference on how much you want to reduce your back corset by. So here is going to be cut off, okay? So this is where I'm going to be putting my eyelets. My eyelets are going to be here. Okay, and then this part is going to be cut off. I'm going to cut off this part. So this 1.25 inch on each side, what this means is that I will have a total of 2.5 inches open at the back, okay? So this is 1.25 on one side, this is one part of the back. On the other side as well is 1.25. So it's going to give me a total of 2.5 inches, okay? So you can decide to do more or you do less. And like I said, you can decide you want yours to be V-shape at the bottom here. If you want that V-shape effect, you should make here less, here more, here less, and then you connect it like a V. So these is my back pattern, okay? So I'm just going to label them so that I don't mix them up. So this is my center back, okay? So I'll put my CB here, center back. This is my side back. So this is 1, 2, and 3. So this is my back pattern. So this is my yoke. I will now cut this out, okay? So this is my yoke. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to cut out this pattern. Mind you, I have not added any sewing allowance to this pattern. So I'm going to add all my sewing allowances when I'm transferring to fabric. So these are my back pattern pieces. So these are my pattern pieces, both my front and back patterns. If you enjoyed this tutorial, you will like this one where I drafted a Victorian corset. I'll put a link in the description box above. I hope this tutorial was helpful. Please give me a thumbs up, like, share. If you have any questions or suggestions, I will be in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in my next tutorial. Take care and God bless.